Hi everybody, my name is Jason Diamond and I hope that you're able to hear. Um, if you've got any problems, go ahead and type it in the chat window and hopefully we'll be able to resolve them. Okay, some spam already. And we're going to talk about Node.js for .NET developers today. Give us a bit of an experience as to what it's like, a taste of what it's like to develop for Node.js. And we're going to not see a whole lot of slides, but I will show, give us a basic idea of what it is, how we could use it, create a simple script and then a web server. Actually, we have some objectives that we can show. So we'll see how to get in, install it, write those scripts, and build a server together. And then use NPM to install third-party packages and build a better server, something that's more equivalent to what we are probably used to creating with our .NET development tools like ASP.NET MVC and Entity Framework. So we'll get a little bit of a taste for this, but we want to cap things off with looking at how to develop inside Visual Studio, because one of the neat things that just happened about 2 months ago is that Microsoft released the Node.js tools for Visual Studio, and that makes it a lot more palatable to work with Node.js for the typical .NET developer, because we're so, I don't want to say spoiled in a bad way, we're spoiled in a very good way by Visual Studio. It's integrated debugger, and the text editor itself is nothing to make fun of. It's a great piece of technology. So we're going to see how to use it as we advance. But we'll start out on the command line, writing scripts in a simple text editor, just so that we can see what's going on with the normal Node.js development process, and then bring it into Visual Studio. Okay, so I got a message from Mary saying the sound looks good, so I assume that it's good for the rest of us. If it's not, then you'll have to mess around with your volume settings. Other than that, let's get started. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them in. If I don't notice them or don't get a chance to answer the questions, or I'm not able, my name is Jason Diamond again. You could usually find me pretty quickly via Googling. I'm not the doctor, the plastic surgeon. My email address, though, is jdiamond@develop.com. Feel free to use that with follow-up questions that you may have after the fact, or maybe you saw me do something that I didn't mention how. Go ahead and ask. Okay, so when we're done, I will upload these slides and the demo code that I write so that you can play with it as well. All right, so let's talk about what Node.js is first. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of slides, but we do have a few in the beginning just to go over. Node.js is really a wrapper around Chrome's JavaScript engine, which is known as V8. So it's the same engine that runs inside the Chrome browser, which is really fast. And the Node.js developers just took that and wrapped it and added some core libraries, or made it accessible to that runtime. So your scripts are being run inside V8 and are using these libraries that are written by Ryan Dahl and Isaac Sluter and all the other Node.js developers who wrote some very low-level network-related primitives. They're highly asynchronous, and they can handle large amounts of I/O. Because of the asynchronous nature of how they design the APIs. In Node, very little does blocking I/O. It's very difficult to do anything synchronously in Node. And when you do write code in the traditional synchronous style that we're used to in JavaScript, you end up blocking all the other requests or whatever else may be happening inside the process. So you try not to do that. And the API makes it very difficult to do, so it's not something that happens that often. But Node.js builds itself as an event-driven, non-blocking application server. But I want to be careful about application server because it's not just about servers. And I shouldn't say server, I should have said platform. You usually use Node to write servers, but you can also use it to write command line scripts or tools that just do whatever it is they need to do using the familiar language, JavaScript, that we all know and, well, some of us love, some of us hate. But we'll see some examples of that as we go. So it was created in 2009 by employees of a company called Joyent. If you haven't heard of them, Joyent is like a cloud hosting provider. So you give them money to host your code in their cloud. They are really mostly known as far as I can perceive, for being the sponsors of Node.JS. So I hadn't heard of them before then, although from what I understand, they are pretty big in the cloud space. But they also offer commercial support for Node.js if you want, but without that, the Node.js community is pretty large and active. There are probably thousands of developers who are contributing open source modules to the ecosystem. There are tens of thousands. I think last time we checked, there was over 50,000 modules available via NPM. And NPM is Node's package manager. It's kind of like NuGet, but for Node. So I'll show how we can get some packages out of there. We can also publish our own packages to it if we have the liberty to be able to share with our code with the rest of the world, which is a very nice thing to do. But there's such a large and active community that it's just a really interesting space to be in, and seeing all the different libraries that people are creating and frameworks, even though a lot of the frameworks are overkill. There's some that the community has kind of solidified around, things like Express and Socket.io and Mongoose, these frameworks that you can use to get some high-level jobs done, because Node by itself is very low level. But I'm going to show us how we can build some simple web applications with Node.js. That's not all it's limited to. And there's very little in Node.js, the core API, that's strictly for building web applications. You're going to have a hard time building a web app without third-party libraries. But it's mostly known for being a platform for creating web apps. And that's my experience, so that's what I'm going to talk about. Here's a small table showing the terms in the Node.js world and equivalents in the .NET world. So if we can think of Node.js as the platform, the equivalent of that in the .NET world would be the CLR, the Common Language Runtime. It's the thing that enables us to run all of the code and APIs that we're going to use. So it's at the very bottom of the stack, but here at the top of the table. The language that we're going to write in is JavaScript, just like in .NET, you write in C# or VB.NET, or I know there are alternatives, but you can choose your language independently of the platform. And the same thing is true in the Node world as well. We have TypeScript and CoffeeScript and many other alternative languages that compile to JavaScript and run in Node.js just fine. Node.js also comes with NPM, which is supposed to be Node's package manager. And that's equivalent to what in the .NET world we use NuGet. We can publish and discover and download the packages and all their dependencies without having to manage those ourselves. So this is the core of Node right here, is the V8 runtime running our JavaScript, which we're using some third-party modules that we discovered via NPM. So I'll show using all three of these as we go. But before we can start writing Node scripts or servers, we need to have it installed. And just like you have to have .NET installed before your users can run your .NET applications. So I'm going to switch to my Windows VM, since that's where most of us are probably doing our development if we're .NET developers. And I can't see my mouse cursor, very curiously. Hope that gets fixed. So I'm visiting nodejs.org. And this is the home site for Node, and click on the downloads link, and you can see the different downloads. It's going to be hard without my mouse cursor. So we have a Windows installer and an installer for Macintosh if you're working on that platform as well. Because it's written for Unix-based environments, you can also get the source code and compile it for Ubuntu or Debian or whatever. There are instructions in the wiki on how to do that. And as far as Windows installation goes, it couldn't be easier. Download the MSI, click through it, and accept all the defaults. And when you're done, switch back to the slides, you will have an executable called Node and another one called npm, which should be in your path. There is an option when you're running the installer to add those directories to your path, and you really want to leave that checked. That enables you to launch Node from the command line. And for other tools that need to find Node, like Visual Studio in a little while, they're going to want to be launching Node for us. So putting it in the path is usually the easiest way for people and tools to discover it. So I've already done that in my Windows VM. I already have Node installed. So then I've also got a empty folder created, and I can type in Node, and we can see what it gave us. And that ends up being, a greater than sign. And this is really a JavaScript REPL. I can start typing in expressions that are JavaScript expressions and do math just like opening up in your browser as you're hitting F12 and then switching to the console tab lets you type in expressions in here. So it's pretty much the exact same thing. Console.log. So all the things that you expect from your browser are available, but you're probably not going to spend a whole lot of time typing in raw code in the console like this. Every now and then I'll pop open a Node REPL and type in a JavaScript expression just because I may have forgotten what methods might be available, or I forget how a certain method behaves, usually revolving regular expressions or dates, and I get to play with it here inside the REPL. And REPL, if you're not familiar with that term, is read, eval, print, loop. So it reads the code from us, evaluates it, prints the result, and then we do that forever. When you're done, hit Control-C a couple times, and you're back in your command prompt. Now, Node.js, if it was just a REPL, wouldn't be interesting. But instead, we're going to write scripts with whatever text editor we want. And I'm going to start off here with Sublime Text. So eventually we'll get into using Visual Studio. But for now, let's make a hello.js script. And let's do the traditional hello world. Hello node.js. So simple console.log. Back to my console. Whoops. I have inside, that's a bummer. It was blocked. So let's start Sublime on this folder. Okay, that's better. Inside this folder, I now have my hello.js script. And cool, my mouse cursor is back. I can run it with node space hello.js. And our hello gets printed to the console. Not too impressive, but that's how we always get started. Or at least me. I always want to see hello world when I'm learning a new language. Node is more interesting in its support for low-level networking protocols and making it really easy for us to spin up servers that speak those protocols. You just saw me type in console.log. If you've done any JavaScript programming, I'm sure you've used console.log and console.other methods. Node has those as well. Back at the nodejs.org website, if we go look at the docs link here in the nav bar, we get to see their API documentation. And this lists all the different modules that come with Node. And they fit on this one page. There's not a lot when we compare it to the Java framework or the .NET-based class library, which just come with thousands and thousands of classes and packages. But the Node framework is pretty small in the API that you get in the core library. You can see that we have some networking-related things like DNS, HTTP and HTTPS, file system access. That's going to be important. Low-level raw sockets via the net module. These things are all modules that we can import into our scripts. And that's one of the things that Node adds on top of JavaScript is the ability to load these modules dynamically. So if we wanted to, for example, host an HTTP server, we can read the documentation and usually see examples that show what methods to invoke. Well, get the HTTP module, then invoke the create server method, and you'll get back an object that has a listen method. So I'm not actually reading the documentation, but I will use that module, and we'll make our first server. Now that may sound a little funny, the way I said it, where I said we're going to make our first server. What's interesting to me about Node is that when you're writing a web application in the Node style, you're actually writing a web server. We're not going to write the code that parses the HTTP requests and generates the responses, but we are going to load in this low-level module called HTTP via Node.js require keyword. This is Node's way of loading some module that's stored somewhere on disk. The HTTP module came with Node. It's part of the core API. And it has the create server method, which takes in a function. So this function that gets passed in the create server method gets invoked for every request that comes in, and we get a chance to write to the response to somehow handle that request. It returns to us, though, a server object. And with that server object, we can tell it to listen on whatever port we want. So it's almost like we're using IIS, but instead of having to install IIS, we use an API that lets us launch IIS dynamically. And we tell it to use port X or port Y, whatever it is that's not going to give us a conflict on our machine. This isn't as full-featured as IIS, though. I don't want to give you that impression. It's a very minimal server that's good enough to respond to requests and generate responses. I don't mean to imply that it's a toy server, though. This is the exact server that the exact server code that all Node.js apps end up using, whether they're using a higher-level framework or not. For now, though, we're just going to go with this, but know that when you go to production, you usually stick something in front of these Node.js servers, like Nginx or HA proxy, or in the Windows world, I should be using terms that we're probably more familiar with, like IIS. And I have at work IIS sitting in front of Node application servers and using IIS as a reverse proxy. So, and sometimes it talks to .NET apps, sometimes it talks to Node apps. I have that flexibility. But I'm going to spin, for this demo, I'm just going to spin up the server on port 8080. So when a request comes in, we need to generate a couple of things. One is we need to write the headers. So write the header, which includes our status code, and if we had any sort of headers themselves, like content type, will be text/HTML. It's usually what you want to generate from your web servers. So tell the API that this request was good and we have a response. We can actually write to the response and say stuff like, hello HTTP. So this is the HTTP module that we're working with right now. And we need to tell Node that we're done writing, so we'll end the response. And this is, I think, the world's smallest web server implementation. You can actually see this if you go back to the nodejs.org website, not the download page, but the home page, and scroll down a bit. They show this exact same example. Slightly different formatting, though, in different ports. So back to our server. Let's launch this. Let's go back to our command prompt in node server.js. And I assume he's running. I did not put any sort of output in here, so we don't see anything happening. But let's go to our browser and try to visit localhost 8080. And hello, HTTP. We can see that that response is there. So every time I make a request, or I'm hitting refresh in here, you can't really tell. But let's go to some other path, like there. We should get the exact same response, hello.http. inside my code, I didn't do anything to distinguish one request from the other. The request order that gets passed in here has a URL property that you can use to dynamically determine what kind of response you want to generate. Let's just log that so we can see what it looks like. And I just made a change to my script. I'm going to come over here and refresh and go back to the console because I said I was logging something, right? But I didn't see anything that got logged here. Well, one of the frustrating things that you hit right away when you start doing Node.js development is that Node does not reload the code for you when you change it. So I have to stop the server and restart it. Come back to my browser, and now we see it logging the requests. And there's a request for the made-up URL I just typed in, and a request for favicon.ico. So that was made by the browser. He's always asking for that URL. It's a bit of a bummer to have to stop and restart the server every time you change code. But that gives us an excuse to use NPM. So I mentioned that NPM is Node's package manager, and it's where you go to find libraries or frameworks or even tools that can do interesting things. And the NPM website is npmjs.org, and yep, it's got 53,000 and then some packages currently available. So it's an awful lot. The majority of them obviously aren't being used that much. There's no way that many can be that widely used. But there is a list here of the most dependent upon projects. Underscore apparently is the most popular. This is you may be familiar with it. It's a utility library for JavaScript, stuff like array searching and whatnot. It's very handy. I like to use it in a lot of my projects. The project that we're going to use in a little bit is called Express. This is Node's equivalent of ASP.NET MVC. And I shouldn't say Node's equivalent because Node does not bless any formal framework for creating web applications the way that Microsoft does. So Microsoft says, hey, use ASP.NET. Then they say use MVC, and now they're saying use Owen and Katana. So they give us these frameworks. Node just lets the community figure it out. And the community's kind of coalesced on Express. There's obviously a lot of people who disagree with that and create their own frameworks, but we'll use that in just a bit. But the reason I want to use NPM right now is not just to show off what it can do, but I want to get a tool called nodemon. So we can search for a package in here. Nodemon is, think of it as the node monitor, and it makes it so that your code does reload every time you change a file and then save it. Nodemon will then notice that and then reload or restart the server, which is super convenient during development. So to get this, we type in npm and we install. It's just like NuGet. You can install packages from the command line. With npm, you install packages from the command line, and you say the name of the packages that you want. Now, when you install stuff with npm, it defaults to installing packages locally. For a development tool like nodemon, I think I'd rather have it installed globally, which is what I normally do for nodemon. So I'm going to use the -G switch. And npm's going and fetching nodemon and all of its dependencies. It will then, once it's done with that, stick it in some well-known spot on my hard drive, and nodemon will be available for my usage. So nodemon now exists. So it's telling me I didn't pass in the right options. So let's pass in, hey nodemon, I want you to run server.js, and whenever it changes, I want you to restart. So we'll come back to our server, and we'll make a change. Control S to save, and it didn't restart. Let me stop it. Sometimes, and I'm not really sure why this is always necessary, but you have to pass in the -L switch, and that turns on legacy watching mode. I don't know if that's because I'm in a VM right now, or it's because I'm in a VM on a shared drive. There's a bunch of variables that may be involved. But let's see if that fixes it. So we'll use legacy watching mode, and we'll make a change again. Oh, I didn't save. not sure I made a change. Oh, it totally did. Restarting due to changes. So I just didn't notice. Let's move this over. Okay, so this is cool. Now I can make changes to my code, do some console.logging, and then figure out what's happening. But honestly, I don't want to do a whole lot of that from the command line in terms of console.logging, because that's what debuggers are for. And I can show really briefly. I'll give it time. Yeah, I'll show really briefly that you can debug with the Node tools. So I'm going to put a debugger keyword in here. This is the same keyword that we use in normal browser-based JavaScript when you want the browser's debugger to stop on a line. So it's like hitting F9 in Visual Studio. Oh, I just saw that nodemon restarted. But we don't want to use him because we're going to use the debugger. So we're going to debug server.js and tell it to run. So the C means continue, and continue doing what you're going to do. I don't think I need to press that. We'll find our server and hit refresh, and it just stopped on this line, the line that's marked green. Then I can hit N to jump to the next line. And oh man, this is painful style debugging, but it can get the job done if this is all you had. But we'll see later. Have no fear that there is a Visual Studio icon here, and we will use Visual Studio's Node.js tools in order to make this a little bit more pleasant. But while we're here, if I wanted to see some value, I can enter the REPL, and now I can use rec.headers, for example. So these are all the headers that my browser passed to the server that we have now running here, that I'm currently in the middle of debugging. Hit Control-C to exit the REPL and go back to the debugger. And when I'm ready to just continue on, I just hit C. And it looks like another request was just made. This time I bet it was for favicon.ico. Let's confirm that. Enter the REPL, ref.url. Yep. Let's exit the REPL and C to continue. And the breakpoint didn't hit again, so we must be done. Okay, debugging is very painful from the command line. Let's switch back to using nodemon. And, well, actually, let's improve our server, because it is going to be very difficult for us to write code that would switch on request.url and say, well, if the request was for /foo and the method was post, do this, else if this URL was /bar and the method was get, do that. Nobody wants to write that kind of code. We want to do the more declarative style of specifying our routes that third-party modules like Express offers. So let's install Express. So as I mentioned, is that's one of the biggest. Oops, I forgot the word install. So npm install Express. It's one of the biggest or most widely used web application frameworks. In my opinion, Express is the closest thing that Node has to ASP.NET MVC. There are plenty of alternatives, though, so choose the one that appeals to you the most. Even the authors of Express are working on a new framework, although I haven't given it any of a look yet, so I don't know if it's something worth migrating to. But I imagine it'll be a slow migration because the majority of people are using Express. But Express is now installed, and it had a lot of dependencies. And each of these had dependencies. We don't have to worry about those too much. But if we were to refresh up here, a Node modules folder just appeared inside my project folder. And if we expand that, we can see that Express is inside that Node modules folder. Now let's make a new web app from here in my text editor. Make a new file, and we'll call it web.js. And this time we'll make a server that uses Express instead of the low-level server that comes with the core API. Of course, Express uses the core API, but we don't have to know those details. But we will require Express, so we'll load it into our script with the require function, this global function that all Node.js modules have. And we'll make our server. So Express gives us a big function. to invoke. And we can pass options into here, but I don't really have any. But we tell it to listen on a port just like before. Chose the same port because I'm not going to be running both servers at the same time. But in between creating the server and then listening on a port, we can tell it that whenever somebody does a GET request for the root of the website, we want it to invoke this function. And this function has a rec and a res, a request and a response arguments that get passed in. So it has the exact same API. You can call res to write and end, etc. You can even combine the two. If you pass a string into res.end, it writes it and then ends the response. So let's bring this up. Nodemon web.js. The extension is assumed. And Nodemon just crashed. I forgot the -L. We needed that last time. I don't know why he decided to just crash right there. There is a new version, or this is the latest version, I guess, version 1.0.6. At work, I've been using 0.7. something. I forget what the version number is. The 1 series is pretty recent, and when I upgraded to it right away, things weren't happy, so I quickly downgraded. It may have some issues. But we now have the server running on port 80. Let's come back to our browser and get rid of that junk. And hello Express. If we typed anything else in, some junk here, sorry, 404, not found. So we have this routing framework here, which is very nice. But really constructing strings inside JavaScript and sending that to our clients, I don't think anybody wants to do that. Express comes with a lot of helper methods that let us more easily send data to our clients. So for example, if we had a file called index.html, and hello from index.html. So Nodemon should have noticed that and restarted. Hope he did. And he did. So now we're feeding the static file. How did I know that this method was available in Express's response object, but is not available in Node's core response object? Well, I just know the API. Express has a website, expressjs.com, and there's an API reference over here, and we can check out the response object and see the docs for the send file method, which just sends a static file, reads it off disk, and writes it to the client's response socket. Most of our web apps, though, have dynamic content, and we're not going to be really sending static content like we are here. Instead, let's create another route and respond to dynamic. So let's show, or let's render a view, which is similar to the terms that we use in ASP.NET MVC when we return a view from one of our controller's action method. We let the Razor view engine do that rendering for us. Here in Express, we have a render method. Let's just specify a view. So let's make a different dynamic endpoint so that you can't get from the same URL in 2 different ways. So then we'll render the dynamic.html file. Now there's going to be a problem when I run this. We're going to go back to our browser and change the URL to say /dynamic. And oops, cannot find module HTML. That's a funny error name. We can also see the stack trace here in our console. Cannot find module HTML. What Express does is look at the extension of the file that you're trying to render, and then it requires a module with the same name. It's this funny convention that it uses in order to process or to dynamically load the code that will process the file and do its dynamic evaluation. Since there is no module called HTML, I'm going to have to use some other extension. And the extension I'm going to use is EJS. I'm going to use the embedded JavaScript view engine. This is probably one of the more popular view engines, but there are tons to choose from. It reminds me a lot of classic ASP. It has a less than % equal signs in them. So I've just changed the code to load dynamic.ejs instead. I just saw nodemon say it restarted. I'm going to refresh my browser, and this is good. The error message changed, but we don't have EJS. So let's get it. We'll stop the server. I could have also just opened a command prompt, another command prompt, but I'll npm install, and the I abbreviation for install is all you need to type in, so npm I ejs. And let npm go fetch that and install it locally. Flip back to our text editor, open node modules, and refresh it. Notice how EJS is now here. So when Express requires the EJS module, which he will because of the extension that he's been told to render here, he will find this code inside his node modules folder. Restart our server. And then refresh. Awesome, the error message changed. That always means progress. So this time the error message said it failed to look up view dynamic.ejs. The file doesn't exist. Let's go and make it exist. Dynamic.ejs. And we'll just type in some simple HTML here. The current time is less than % equals new date. So less than % equals starts an expression, % greater than ends the expression. The date constructor function here is the exact same data object that we have inside our browsers when we're working with JavaScript. Yeah, it's kind of a sucky data object, but it's all we have. But there's some dynamic code in here, so let's see what happens when we run it. Come back to our browser and refresh. And oh no, failed to look up view. Express might need to be told what folder the view is in. So server.set, the views are in this folder right here. __ dir is a function, global variable that Node sets that contains the path to the folder that contains the current file, the current JS file. So if you're a C or C++ programmer, it's kind of like __ file, __. So it's almost like a preprocessor thing that's just set for you automatically. Hope that fixed it. Yay, it did. So the current time is, and here's our dynamic content, the highlighted stuff right there. So as I refresh, that should change. 1028, 1029, not 1020, but the seconds are getting bigger. Very cool. Let's see, I don't know if it's very cool, but it works. Let's see if we can do a post. So we'll add a form to the page. Method equals post, and action, we'll post to say hello. We'll make a new endpoint here. And input name equals name. We're going to type our name in there. And then what is your name? And then we need a button, type equals submit. Otherwise we won't be able to post. Okay, looks like it restarted. So I'm going to post this endpoint say hello. If we were to come to the browser and refresh, we have our new form here, we post. Sorry, there is no endpoint called say hello. Of course not, because I didn't create it yet. Let me close the other two files that we're not using. So here inside the file that basically defines my server, whenever we post to say hello, we want this code to run. Now you can probably imagine that this file is going to get out of control in terms of the amount of server.gets and post calls that we're going to be making, and not to mention how much code is going to appear inside these functions. If we wanted to modularize our application so that request handlers that have a lot of logic in them are in separate files and we can unit test them independently, we can totally do that with Node. Let's go and create a new file, and we'll call it something like routes.js. And in here, we will create a function called sayHello that takes in a request and a response, and it does something with that. From my server code, I can now, this is the wrong server, we want to be in web.js, that's what I wanted. From in here, I can now, let's do it at the top, routes equals require that file, but because this file is in my current folder and not in the Node modules folder, I have to tell Node.js how to find it. And to do that, I just specify in the require call the path to it. So we just do / because it's in the current folder. If I had it installed inside Node modules or was a core module that came with Node.js, we don't have the / in front. But for your custom stuff, you do have the /. And you can have them in your modules inside subfolders, so organize them however you like, just like you can organize your namespaces in .NET. I'm trying to keep it simple right now, just put everything inside one file. But now that I have my routes, I can, routes dot, I think I called the function sayHello in there. So this will make it a little bit easier for us to, at a glance, see all the endpoints and then where to go to see the code that handles those endpoints. We probably want the rest of them to be in there as well, but I'm not going to bother. For now, let's just go make sure that everything looks good inside routes.js. And we do have a sayHello function. It's not doing anything yet, but it's not exported. In Node.js, this function is private to this module. It's not going to be accessible the way I think it is, where I said right here, routes.sayHello. I have to explicitly export it by saying module.exports.sayHello is equal to the function that I want to export. This and this don't have to be the same, but they are. It just makes sense. They don't even have to be defined like this. It could have been a anonymous or a function expression. So sayHello is equal to the function with no name, but it will do sayHello type stuff. So assigning objects or assigning properties to the model that exports is how you do exporting in Node.js. Funny looking, in my opinion, but it's how it works. Inside sayHello, I guess we will say hello by sending hello, whoever you are, to the client. We could render a view here or send a file. We've got all sorts of options, but we'll just send some static text. But I need to know the name. So how do I get the name? Well, the name is probably going to come in on the request object. If we go back to and look at our form, which was in dynamic.ejs, we can see that it's an input named name, and since we're posting to that endpoint, it's going to be in the body of the request. And come back to our file, var name is equal to rec.body.name. This is going to be the API that we use with Express in order to get these post variables that got sent to the server. So let's try this. It's not going to work. Oops. Cannot read property name of undefined. So apparently, body is not defined, and it seems like I lied or I got the API wrong. But connect, I shouldn't have said connect, but Express is a very small framework. You only use the features that you need to use. And parsing the post data that comes in on a request is considered an optional feature. Over here inside my server, I may want to say, hey, Express, I want you to use your URL encoded middleware. The URL encoded middleware knows how to parse the input that comes in on a post request, as long as it's the appropriate content type, and then it populates request.body with the data that it found there. If I put this anywhere before I need it, that middleware will have a chance to run. If you've had a chance to look at Owen or Katana in the Microsoft space just yet, Express is very similar to that in how you can build middleware and find reusable middleware. They're basically just functions that people have already written, and you can add them to your pipeline. And so we've done that here with a built-in middleware that came with the Express project. How did you know to find that? Well, they have a middleware section right here, and it's very small. They don't have all of it. So if you Google for connect, oh, that's probably too vague. Connect, oh wait, I can see it right there. So connect is the middleware library that Express uses. So Express has a bunch of middleware Connect has a bunch of middleware that comes with Connect. Express comes with Connect, and that gives us URL encoded. So sorry if I explained that in a confusing way, but we should be able to try it again. I hit refresh, now it's asking me if I want to confirm the repost I'm about to do. And hello, the string I typed in. Guess it works. So we did have that posted to the server. If we open the network pane right here and refresh, we can see exactly how that happened. There's our form data right there with all those vowels. So normal HTTP stuff, you have to know a little bit about what's going on in the Node world in order to structure an Express web application. No two Express web apps are structured in the same way. Everybody does it differently, and that's one of the cool things about Node and the libraries that we use is that there is no. This is good and bad, but I consider it more good than bad. But there is no authority saying write your apps this way, because it's never true that one size fits all. I've never seen somebody say this is the perfect framework to solve all your needs, and then have it actually solve all my needs. No, it all requires customization and tailoring to the context in which I'm in. But hopefully with these small building blocks, being able to create modules like we just did right here, a routes module, and import them into your other modules and use them. Once you see those building blocks, you can do neat stuff like have a folder full of routes endpoints and dynamically load them using the file system API. I do that in my project at work all the time. So are we sick of doing stuff in the command line yet? It's close to an hour. Let's stop the website and switch to Visual Studio. So it's open right now. I'm not sure why it's open. Let me close it just to make sure I don't have a product open. And reopen. I have already installed Visual Studio's Node.js tools. All these links, by the way, that I have, these tabs that I have open, I am going to share and save, and when I make the source code available, and I'll have the links in there as well. But Node.js tools for Visual Studio is Microsoft's plugin, I guess. Think of it as a ReSharper for ReSharper needs an update, but for Node.js. So I've already downloaded and installed this. The install was totally straightforward. I didn't choose any specific options. I just told it which. I think when I downloaded it, I told it which version I wanted to use. You can download the version from 2012 or 2013. I'm using 2012, so I downloaded this version. I have heard, or I've seen in comments, that this does not work with Express versions. So if you're using Visual Studio Express at home, you might be a bit sad to hear that, but I haven't tried it myself. So you may want to give it a shot, or complain to Microsoft. Maybe they'll fix it. So now that I have that installed, which you didn't see me install it, but I installed it earlier this morning. If we go create a new project, and we look at our templates, go to the JavaScript area, and here is all the different templates that came with this plugin for Visual Studio. You can create a brand new, look at that, Express application. So Express is not part of Node.js, but Microsoft recognizes that Express is the main way that people create web apps in Node.js, so they bundled a template that gets you up and running. So you can see a little sneak preview of it right here. And there's the get method that takes in the function and the URL that it responds to. And so it's the same code that we just wrote. They just use different variable names, app instead of server. I'm not going to create a blank Express application. I want to use the code that I already wrote. So I'm going to choose this from existing Node.js code. And now it's going to ask me where that code lives. And I have it on a shared drive. I think it's called Node for Net. It's now asking me which one of the files in here is the main file. And I think the main file is web.js. This is the one that launched the Express server. Server.js was the one that did the low-level HTTP module. We don't want that. We want the Express one. So we'll make that guy our main. And this, I guess, is going to be where we save our Node.js proj file. Sure. I am being warned that the files are coming from a share. That's okay. It's shared in my host OS. He's thinking, he's doing stuff, he's done. So we have web.js. It's slightly bolder than the other files. I don't know if that's visible. But here's our code. And let's, just for fun, say that we wanted to create another endpoint. Server dot, oh my, look at all this IntelliSense. It's typical JavaScript IntelliSense in that it's not 100% accurate because there are a lot of methods in here that I can tell came from other libraries and other JavaScript APIs. So use TypeScript and then you'll have perfect IntelliSense. But with raw JavaScript, being its dynamic nature just makes it hard. But you get some. Let's hit F5, see what happens. We should have is it in here? Yep, here's oh no, that must be that was my Sublime text editor. Oh yeah, I don't think I'm outputting anything yet, am I? Inside the server. Okay, so I'm staring at a blank console and wondering why I don't see anything. It's because I'm not outputting anything. But let's just make sure it works. Go to our browser, and did I lose? I guess I did. Localhost 8080/dynamic, sure. What is my name? Is this stuff working? It must be working. Man, it would have been nice if we could have put some break or some console.logs in here so we can see that it's working. Oh, but wait a second, we're in Visual Studio now. Let's just set breakpoints. We can't set one on this line, so let's load routes.js. And we can set a breakpoint right here. Back to our server and go back. Refresh, breakpoint hits. Use the immediate window, rec.url. Yep, /dynamic, rec.headers. Oh, that's a bummer. It's not showing it. The rec object is huge, but rec.headers isn't that big, but it's not showing it in a very nice way. So let's console.log rec.headers. But console.log returns undefined, but I think we should see it in our console output, so we can see all the headers that were passed in. It's got some issues. But it is their very first release, so I know that it'll just get better over time. But we're stuck on this breakpoint right now. Let's hit F5 to continue onward. And the browser should be ready. We'll post, and another breakpoint should hit. And it just did. We can hover over rec.body.name. It tells us exactly what's in there, which is very nice. It's the same debugger that we're used to using. And F10, F10 and F11 do the step in and step out and all the stuff that you're used to. I just hit F5 there. Very cool. We can stop the debugger. So normal shift F5, stop the debugger, and we're back in an environment, hopefully, that's a little bit more welcoming. being able to debug is just a huge deal in my opinion. And the command line debugger just is not cutting it for me. When I'm on a Mac, if I need to debug, I've been using WebStorm more recently. Do I have a slide for this? If you, I don't know, not a slide, but a link for JetBrains.com. This is the company that makes ReSharper and IntelliJ. A lot of .NET developers use their tools. They have a product called WebStorm, which is amazingly cheap. It's like $49 for the full thing, but you can try it out for free for a bit to see if it works for you. But it's basically Visual Studio, but geared strictly for editing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it comes with a Node.js debugger. Really good support for Node. And I can use this on my Mac, and I use this at work sometimes. So cool. Let's, while we're here, talk a bit more. We might have skipped a few topics. I guess let's catch up with the slides. Catch up with the slides because I'm only like on the third slide. I just mentioned WebStorm by JetBrains. You can check that out, or Visual Studio if you have a license for that. If you have MSDN, the tools are free though. Sample script using npm. So I did mention that npm installs locally into the Node modules folder. I have a couple dependencies right now, and here inside Visual Studio, let's flip back to the Windows VM. We can see that there's a Node modules folder. Oh, I lost my mouse cursor. So sad. Something to do with switching back and forth. We can see that there's two folders in there, EJS and Express. Now, these folders kind of have a ghost outline to them, like they're not really here. These contain third-party libraries, and we typically don't check those into our source control systems. I know that some people do, and there are pros and cons to doing that or not doing that. But most people do not, during development, check their Node modules folder in. But if that was gone, how would I know what my dependencies were? Well, Node has or NPM has this really useful feature, which I have to use from the command line. It's not built into Visual Studio yet, but it has this ability to init or initialize a package, your own custom package. And it asks you a bunch of questions. Just go ahead and say, hit enter until you're done. You can read them when you're practicing on your own, but I'll show you what the end result of that was. If I switch back and then come back okay, so that just fixed it. Switching over and coming back fixed it. If I were to refresh in here, well, let's show all files. There's no refresh. Let me unload and reload the project. So now there should be a package.json file here, and there is. And you can see the result of all those questions it asks us, but the important thing here is this dependencies key, which says, hey, this package, my application, depends on EJS and Express. And if somebody were to delete rd/s, the node modules folder, so now it's completely gone, and it's not gone at all. Spacing out. I want to type rm-rf. Where's Explorer? Okay, there's Explorer. Let's just delete node modules this way. But yeah, I want to type rm-rf, but that only works on Macs. So my node modules folder is now gone. I'm going to launch the application again, or I'm going to try, and we're going to see that it fails. Module not found. Cannot find module express. Okay, so obviously, without my dependencies here, I can't run. But this file, package.json, shows what my dependencies are. that allows anybody who has your code to type npm install, and npm or npmi for short, and it will read package.json, discover your dependencies, and re-download them for you. So you can have some sort of pre-build event that does this to simulate what NuGet does now, where it restores packages that are missing when you build. Or you can just tell people when they check out of TFS or Git or whatever to run npm install before we start developing. All up to you. But node models should be back now. And here are our folders. I don't know if they ever went away because I didn't refresh here. So Node gives us a way to track our dependencies, which is very convenient. Like, for example, if I wanted to install, actually, let's use Visual Studio to install. I'm not going to use a command line. But notice how Visual Studio has this other folder here called npm. I don't have a folder called npm in my project, but this is some sort of virtual folder that the Node.js tools add to Visual Studio that lets us right-click on it, and we can choose Manage npm modules. And here we can see that our packages that we're relying on here internally are EJS and Express, but I can go and find other packages. For example, if I wanted to talk to a MongoDB database, I might use Mongoose, which is one of the more popular packages for doing that. So we'll just install that. It's very nice that we can do this inside a GUI instead of having to drop to the command line, even though it's not that hard to do it from the command line. And it does seem faster doing it there. It's taking his time. And he's done. So let's see how package.json looks. Sadly, the tools are not saving it, Mongoose inside package.json, which is a bit of a bummer. When I do this from the command line, I always do install -- save Mongoose like that in order to have npm download and install the package and also write it to my package.json file. So he's basically reinstalling, doing what Visual Studio just did, plus he was supposed to write it here, but it did not reload. Is that oops, I keep missing. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't reload. And -- save. I normally do it with a --S, which is supposed to be the abbreviation. I may be very surprised if, or I will be very surprised if that doesn't save it, because that's what I do all the time. Bummer. Oh, it got saved. Visual Studio just decided not to reload the file for me. Okay, it's there now. So I don't know who was being flaky. I'm going to blame Visual Studio because the tools for Node.js are pretty alpha. It's the very first release, but it is here. And maybe he did write it to me, write it to the file the very first time we installed it via Visual Studio, but I just didn't notice. So we have this third module now installed and ready to go. We can start using it and talk to our MongoDB database. So we do that just for fun, just so we can complete the full cycle here. I know this is pretty much a toy application, not server.js, but web.js. But we're just trying to describe the syntax and the mechanics for doing this, just to give you a taste for it, and you can decide whether you like the style or the development experience. But let's create another module. In Node projects, I like to, maybe I go overkill and create too many projects, too many models, I should say. But let's make one called models.js. I like to encapsulate the different parts of my app in different modules. So we'll require the Mongoose library that we just downloaded. And we will export how about a module called person, or a model called person. And we mongoose dot model, whoops, IntelliSense kind of screwed me over there. Person and the schema that describes that. So persons probably have names, those are strings. I don't know, they may have ages, those are numbers. They're retired, Boolean. So you can go ahead and describe your object how you like. You can have arrays and sub-objects, etc. So now that I've defined my model inside this separate module, inside my Bootstrap script, I will do the same thing as far as requiring Mongoose goes. And it will connect to my local database. I have a MongoDB instance running on this VM. So I'll connect to localhost / mydb. MongoDB will just make up a DB if it's the first time you ever hit it. So we don't have to explicitly create it ourselves. How are we going to use this? How about instead of saying hello, we have a create person endpoint. And it'll go to routes and invoke this create person function. Okay, let's go find our routes, which are in this other module. Nice and small. Model.exports.createPerson is equal to that function. And in here, var models is equal to require the models that I know are located inside the same folder. We will make up a new models.person object and pass in his name, which will come in rec.body.name, just like before, like we did up here. His age is 99, and yeah, if you're that old, you better be retired. So we make up this new object, we can assign it to a variable, and we can tell it to save himself in the database. Now, saving to the database as a I/O operation, that takes time. We have to send the bits across the network. Here it's on the same machine, but the same concept still applies. It's going across the socket, and socket is some other process, and that's going to take some amount of time. JavaScript is single-threaded, so we do not want to block that thread. This save method is asynchronous. It's not a blocking method call. In order to know when the save method is done, he passes in or invokes a function, and if an error happened, he passes an error object. If there was no error, then this will be null or undefined. And we could say if there was an error, then res.send that error with a 500 status code, internal server error. Else, we'll send, how about just a string thanks? I don't really have much to say here. But this should populate the database, the person collection, the people collection, with a person who's 99 and retired. It's probably, I hope I spelled this with a D. Let's go check just to be sure. Retired, yeah, with a D. Let's save everything, all of our files, and then relaunch. Oh, we forgot one last thing, and that is who's going to post this endpoint. This endpoint is being routed to or bound to /createPerson, and our form is not talking to that yet. Our form, I think, is in dynamic.ejs, and yep, he needs to change to createPerson. Alrighty, let's now launch this in our browser. Module not found. So who wants a module called Kerberos? That's okay. localhost 8080. Okay, that's strange. Where is Mongoose? Let's do our normal rebooting. When in doubt, reboot. So we'll reload the project. And there's Mongoose. Its presence here inside Visual Studio should have affected Node, the runtime, finding it on disk. So let's try again. F5. And I'm really surprised. I do Mongoose on Node all the time. Let me try it from the command line. So node web. Okay, so I have a syntax error inside my JavaScript, and we're getting some other completely other error inside when we launched it. I don't know who to blame for that. Well, I should blame myself. My problem is this is not plural, it's singular. So maybe IntelliSense was telling me that and I ignored it. Oh man. There needs to be an L there as well. It's kind of cold. I live in Southern California. I know it's the warmest spot in the country right now, but this is cold for us. So my fingers aren't really feeling it right now. Let's try again. I'm not sure if this is a error that we can ignore. If we go look at debug exceptions, let me see what we have this set to. For Node.js exceptions, it's breaking on all thrown exceptions. Okay, so we don't want to break on all thrown exceptions. I don't know why that's checked, if that's the default or not. But it may be running. Okay. Try from the command line again. Node web. I did the exact same thing in this file as well. Since I'm seeing syntax errors better on the command line, I'm going to keep using that until they all go away. Alright, I've paused long enough for where I think there's no errors. Now I'm going to switch back to Visual Studio and launch this again in our debugger. This time it looks like we're not seeing that Kuros module can't be found. That must be an optional module that somebody is looking for, and he's not finding it, but he must be catching the exception, and that's okay. So now that we have this running and hopefully good to go. Okay, so sorry about that. I guess it's nice to see it when other people screw up, so that way you don't have to make the same mistakes they do. So at our dynamic endpoint, and we still got breakpoints set. Get rid of those. And back to our browser. What is our name? This is now going to go to some other endpoint, to the create person endpoint. Hope it works. It says thanks, so there must have been no error. Let's drop to the... Let's open a new tab. Oh, I guess we don't need to because we got this one. Mongo localhost. I think I said MyDB. MyDB. And there's probably a collection called people here. Show collections. Yep, there's people. So db.people.find. You gotta spell it right. So there's a person with that funny name who's 99 and retired. And he has his own generated primary key. So here's another person just to prove that's working. And we'll find again. Now you got the two people. Number one and number two. Okay, so Mongoose, I have a link to its website right here open in this tab. I will save this with everything else. It's got some pretty good documentation. This is the closest thing to Entity Framework that we may have in Node. and it's obviously specific to MongoDB, but there are lots of ORMs, or I guess they call this an ODM, an Object Document Mapper, not an Object Relational Mapper. But there's probably ORMs in the Node world too. I just haven't had to use any yet. I have talked to SQL Server from Node.js apps, and the same code works in both Windows and on Mac because it's all JavaScript, and it talks to TDS protocol to the SQL Server. And I've only done that, though, for executing queries, like doing imports from legacy SQL Server systems. So I haven't used the actual ORM with Node.js, but I'm sure they exist. I would just search through NPM to see if you can find any ones that are popular enough and updated enough to where you might want to try it out and trust it. So hopefully that was a good introduction. It's been a little bit over an hour as far as how long this has taken. I just wanted to give you a taste for what programming with Node.js is like. And you saw me start out on the command line, then we switched to Visual Studio. Visual Studio, the support is a bit on the iffy side, I guess, but I'm sure it'll get better. It does have support, though, for making it a little bit more localhost 8080. Making a little bit more like what we're used to with our normal MVC websites. If you have this checked, start web browser and launch, and you typed in the actual port that you're using, then you launch Visual Studio or the debugger again, and your browser starts with it. Well, it's supposed to. And he may still be thinking about that. I think I typed in everything in, right? But I'd probably use this at work, so I don't know why it didn't just work right there. Stop the debugger. Let's save everything, just in case it needs stuff to be saved. And he's still not launching it? Oh, come on. Alpha software. It'll get better. Debugger stopped. Unless I screwed something up in that. I'll watch the video again and find out what my mistake was. So I'm going to check everything in to GitHub, all the source code that I have, and if you can remember my name, J Diamond, Jason Diamond is my full name. jdiamond@develop.com is my email address. My GitHub address is jdiamond. So it's going to go into this GitHub repository in just a few minutes. So yeah, we can zoom in a little bit there. So you can see it's github.com/jdiamond. And from there, you can find the most recent repository. And one final note is that we at Develop Mentor are always exploring new technologies, and we're about to start offering Node.js training. So this webcast was supposed to be a bit of a sneak preview, just to kind of gauge people's interest and give people a chance to see if this is something they may be interested in. So if you can come to develop.com, the website, hit the Node.js link, and you can see the details of what it is that we want to provide. This will probably start, I don't know, I'm guessing the second quarter, but type your email address in here and you can find out. So thanks everybody for coming. Oh, there was some questions. Don't leave yet. If you had some questions, I will notice them and try to answer some of them. What version of VS are we using in this webinar? I was using 2013, Rodrigo. Sound is fine. What is the full name of NPM? The full name of NPM, I think most people say Node Package Manager. But if you look through the frequently asked questions of NPM, it kind of like jokingly says NPM is not an acronym for anything. So I don't really know like what they're trying to do by being silly like that. But you can basically pretend it means Node Packet Manager. I almost said NuGet. The toast is very distracting. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what toast you're referring to. Was I did see a few drop box pop-ups, but that was a while ago. I hope that wasn't too bad. Sorry about that. I'll turn off Dropbox next time. Thomas is being silly. I have to leave. Is this available to download so I can finish watching later? Yes, you probably already left though. Sorry that we saved the questions to the end. Is this analogous to writing a controller in MVC? You're probably thinking of when you ask that question, if I was typing in server.get/ and I pass in a function, you can think a little bit of that function as being an action method inside a controller. Yes. There is no direct equivalent to a controller because there is no, in JavaScript, there are no classes. So we don't have these class-like things that contain a bunch of methods. This is not the API that Express exposes. But instead you say, hey, whenever a get or a post or whatever request is made to / whatever, invoke this function. So it's more function-based than class-based. Randall's asking about what I mean by the differences between local and global. And the difference is the default install in NPM is to install those modules into the node-modules folder inside the current directory. So that makes it possible for you to zip up a folder containing your application code and all your dependencies if you install everything locally. If you install things globally, then those dependencies won't be in the zip file. So it's kind of harder to manage those global dependencies. NPM and Node, they prefer locally installed modules. So that's the main style that's evangelized in the Node community. In the .NET terms, think of global modules as being in the GAC, the global assembly cache, and local modules as being those modules in your local bin folder, right? In your web apps bin folder, and where everything is automatically referenced. So the default is definitely to prefer local ones, and you should very rarely be typing in -G to install a global module. Node.js is cross-browser. Node.js, the answer to this is sure. Yeah, it's cross-browser if you write code that generates cross-browser code. Right, Node.js runs on the server, so there's really no browser runs Node.js code. But when your browser talks to a server written in Node.js, your server will give your browser static assets, HTML and CSS and JavaScript for that browser to render and run. If you write cross-browser HTML and JavaScript to give to your browsers, then yeah, Node.js is cross-browser too. But it's not really a question that you would ask because Node.js doesn't really care about browsers. It's totally independent. But they do use JavaScript. That's the thing that they have in common, is that this language is the same. But the APIs are totally different. You will never run, I shouldn't say never, because there are tools that will take Node.js code and recompile it, sort of, or transpile it into code that can run in your browser. But for the most part, the APIs you use on the server are totally different from the APIs you use on the client. So Rob asks, are rec and res the required variable names? No, you can call them whatever you want. Rec and res, just call them that because I'm lazy and like typing in short names. Request and response are totally fine. It's very rare for a API in JavaScript to be able to look at the names of your function arguments. That's not really something that JavaScript supports directly. There's no reflection API in JavaScript like there is in .NET. So it's kind of difficult to see what the names of the function arguments are without inspecting the source code. Yeah, so call them whatever you want. How come we didn't use require when we were using EJS? It's a really good question, Nader. That's because Express used require for us. When I told Express to render a view, let me flip back to the code that was rendering that view, that was right here, I gave him a file name. And Express looked at the extension of the file name, and he basically took that extension and required that extension for us. So we don't see it because we didn't type it in. Express did it. We could require EJS and directly use this API, but we don't have any need to. I don't think I have ever needed to directly use a View Engine's API directly. I always do it via Express. Back to the questions. Is there a way to Sorry, is there a way to buy support for Node.js? Yes. Go to joyent.com. They are the company that employs the creators of Node and the current maintainers. They sponsor Node.js development in a sense, and you can give them money and they will give you support. I don't know what the cost is. I haven't ever purchased it. And it's kind of new. They just announced that last month, I believe. Your client cannot use free software. Okay, yeah, it's a common problem. No matter what, Node.js is open source. So if the requirement is not we cannot use open source software, then Node.js just is not gonna meet that. But if the requirement is we need to have paid support, then you can get it. There's two companies actually, Joyent and another company called Strong Loop, that provides paid support for Node.js. So Bernard asks, does the download for Node.js for VS include Node.js itself? Oh, that's a good question. I have no idea. I don't think it does, but I installed Node.js myself. I noticed that when we look at our project properties in Visual Studio, you see how it has the path to Node.js? And this is where it gets installed when you run the installer from nodejs.org. So my assumption is that he guessed where it was going to be, and he used this path as a default, and he found it there. But if I hadn't installed it, he would fail to run this. But that's totally just an assumption. I've never tried to install the Node.js tools without Node.js. But installing Node.js, really simple. Don't worry about it at all. Just run the MSI and don't change anything. Just click next all the way through. An MS tested version of Node.js. I see what you're looking for. Yeah, I don't think that's the case, but of course I'm just assuming. I don't think I'd want that to be the case, to be perfectly honest. Sometimes the Node.js community or team finds security flaws, memory leaks, and they release new versions. I want the option to be able to say, hey, I want to use this newest version because it fixes some sort of flaw or vulnerability that the MS tested version does not. The Node.js team seems to make a new release every week or two. Maybe not as often as every week, but it seems like every couple of weeks there's a new version that's coming out. That's typically much faster than the speed at which Microsoft releases stuff. But I can see the advantage of having an MS-tested version, so you feel confident about that version as your baseline, and then you can decide to change it after the fact. But I don't think it exists. Lee asked, what about the output tab window in the lower right corner? Does it output console text? Oh, that was probably when I was trying to output the headers. Let's try that again. Set a breakpoint somewhere. We already have one right there. Oh, Team Explorer. We want web.js, and we got a breakpoint right there in dynamic, or in, yeah, /dynamic. That's dynamic. So breakpoint just hit, and console.log, hi. It's not here. Okay, so I guess that answers the question. But if we go find the actual console, there it is, hi. I don't know. Bummer. For now. Maybe they'll improve it in the future. Back to questions. When this framework is matured, who will use it and for what? That's a good question. I'm not sure what you mean by the framework, though, if you're talking about Express or Mongoose, but in general, who uses Node? Well, recently, Walmart and PayPal were in the news, in the blogosphere, talking about their usage of Node and how they're completely switching from, I think they're switching from Java to Node.js and seeing some very good results as far as performance goes. Those are two very high-profile sites, Walmart and PayPal, that are using it. But there's a lot. I was really surprised a few months ago to go to a local user group meeting or I saw a talk on Windows Azure. And an employee from Microsoft was there giving a presentation, and he said, everything you're looking at right now on the screen, he was showing us the Windows Azure dashboard is written in Node. So even Microsoft is using Node.js internally. And you can host your Node.js code on Windows Azure or other providers like Heroku, other platform as a service providers. But Azure is probably the most widely known to .NET devs, but it now supports Node, which I thought was rather amazing. Thank you, Dan. You totally caught my error. I just didn't have the questions open. Yeah, you got it. Yep, Randall found it also. So everybody saw my error except for me. So Keith is saying that Mongoose needed Kerberos, but I think it was an optional dependency. Well, you guys are actually paying attention. What version of VS? So I was using 2012, but it works in 2013 as well. I haven't tried using 2013 yet, so I don't know how awesome it is. Sankaran said he's using 5858 as a port. That is not the port I was using. That is the port that Node.js was exposing its debugger API over. And so Visual Studio was talking to the Node.js process over that port. And you probably saw that when we launched the it says right here, debugger listening on port 5858. So this is just Node.js saying, hey, any debuggers out there, you can talk to me on 5858. But I never connected that port. I always connect to 8080 because that's what the HTTP server was listening on. The debug server was listening on 5858. It is totally new for me. Cool. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Can we say that Node.js runtime has an in-build server? I don't know if I would say it that way. It has the APIs that let you build a server, but I wouldn't say it has a built-in server because you can create as many as you want. I created one server running on port 8080. I can create 10 servers running on different ports, all on the same machine. So, and I do that. I have scripts that are in my project at work that launch a server on this port and a server on that port. So some of them are web servers. Some of them are other kinds of servers. I have one that can connect with the remote REPL. But you can basically build your infrastructure with the API that Node gives you. Nobody ever calls it the Node web server, right? You make your web server using their APIs. An HTTP module is using it. I see where you're going, Gopi, but I still don't think that's the appropriate way to phrase it. The HTTP module is just opening a socket, and it just knows the HTTP protocol. So it listens on that socket, and when it gets a request, it's formatted in the correct way according to the HTTP spec. It responds in the correct way according to the HTTP spec. So it's just low-level socket work. The same kind of stuff the Microsoft programmers use to write IIS. They just wrote it in JavaScript. Can we use this in place of MVC? Of course. Yeah, you can. MVC is a web framework, right? If you have something else that can respond to requests, sure, it can do the same thing. That's all MVC does is respond to requests. You will not be able to take existing MVC code and have it be run inside Node. Obviously, Node's all about JavaScript. MVC is all about .NET, so C# or VB. But you can recreate the same thing. Why do I use IIS in front of Node.js? So that's because the place I'm working at right now is a Windows shop. So we are probably going to deploy, we haven't gone into production yet, but we're probably going to deploy into the cloud on something like EC2 or DigitalOcean using Linux servers. But internally, we have all Windows machines. And so the dev server they gave us was a Windows machine for us to do our initial testing on. And so we're using IIS there in front of Node because I've got multiple apps on the same machine. Some are written in different languages. Some are written in .NET, some are written in Node. And IIS is a totally suitable reverse proxy. And it can basically sit in front of all those apps. And so we have one server with one name on one port that we can talk to all the different apps that we have running during development. How do we write unit tests? Oh, that's a good question. Totally didn't get to didn't get to talk about it, but I'll save it in the links. Let me go back to the browser we got over here and show Mocha. Mocha is probably the most popular unit test library. It supports BDD style unit testing. You can see the describe and the it syntax. It also supports the QUnit style and the more verbose like JUnit and NUnit style. So it has different, it calls them interfaces. But I'll save this link with the rest of the code. This is the one that I tend to use the most when I'm unit testing my Node.js code. You need to also find a assertion library when you're using this. So the assertion library I use is called Chai. And it has different ways of doing asserts. Mocha just lets you run the test. And any assertion library that you use gets caught by Mocha. So those are the two libraries I would look at as far as doing testing of your Node.js code. Nice presentation, Thomas. Thank you very much. Lee again, do you have an opinion on how easy it is to integrate formal unit testing in Node.js? It's totally easy. So it's so easy that I do it at work. So I set things up so that I have my unit tests and my actual source code files. Whenever they get modified and saved to disk, I've got my little command line process running that sees the changes and it reruns the test right away. And it sends me a toast pop-up. I'm using Growl on my Windows machine at work. Here on my Mac, I go to the notification center. But if a test fails, I see toast that appears on the screen. And so I did that. I'm pretty sure that Mocha, well, I'm definitely using Mocha among others, but I'm pretty sure that it has a file watcher support. So that's probably what I'm using there. So you basically launch the Mocha runner from the command line and tell it to watch the files, and it reruns them every single time the file changes. So it makes it pretty easy to rapidly get feedback on the state of your test, whether they're passing or not. Without the compile process, it's pretty fast. Really impressed by it. Advantage over MVC. So you're getting down to like the core. Like, why should you choose MVC over Node or vice versa? So there's no good answer for that. That's like saying, do you prefer Mexican food versus American food? Right? I live in San Diego, so I eat both. They have their places. Neither one is better than the other. MVC and Node, when used to do MVC-like things, are totally equivalent, and they can do the exact same thing. So it depends on your team. Is your skill set entirely .NET based? Are you one of the people who hate JavaScript as a language and don't want to go anywhere near it? If those things are true, then Node.js is not for you. But it's just a style thing. Some people like statically typed languages like C#. Some people like dynamically typed languages like JavaScript. There's theoretically supposed to be this advantage of using Node where you're using the same language you're doing your client-side code with, right? It's just all JavaScript. I don't find that to be a good argument because the JavaScript I write on the client is way different from the JavaScript I write on the server. So there is still this contextual, mental shift I have to make when I switch from client mode to server mode. But that is an argument that people make. Another argument might be cross-platform portability, right? Node runs on any Unix environment you can throw it at, and now also Windows. As far as I know, it's mostly deployed to Linux environments. Not just Linux, but any Unix-based environment. CentOS or Ubuntu seems to be the most common. But you can often find cloud providers that host Linux VMs or VPSs much cheaper than Windows ones, including really good ones with SSD drives and a good amount of memory for $5 a month from a provider like DigitalOcean. So that might be an advantage too. But it's just another way of doing the same thing. In the development, industry, we're very fashion oriented and we follow fads a lot. There's no good justification for doing what we do, but we do it. And Node.js is the new shiny. But I can say from my experience using it, and I've done a lot of .NET development. I'm primarily a .NET developer, but my current project is using Node. I'm having a lot of fun. That's not a good reason. You probably couldn't convince your boss, so that's a good reason to choose a platform. But my boss let me choose a platform, and it's been working out really well. So I've been really stoked with it. Sorry, Jun or June. Yes, Node.js is not going to mix well with your other .NET tools or languages. There is a project that does make them mix together. I forget what the name of it is, but it basically hosts the CLR and Node in the same process and then allows you to communicate across the two languages. I would look for something like Node.js.net or just Google for those terms and you'll probably come across it. I've had no reason to do that. The reason why this is called Node.js the reason why we call this webinar Node.js for .NET developers is because we wanted to just demonstrate what Node.js development is like to a bunch of .NET developers. The majority of Developmentor's customers are .NET shops. So that's who we expect most of the people to show up with. And part of that is showing their favorite tool, Visual Studio. You can kind of get Node.js running in Visual Studio for doing development. But yeah, as far as it goes with communicating with other .NET apps using remoting or anything like that, it's .NET specific. Nope, there's nothing that'll help you out there that I talked about and that I have experience with also. But I know I've seen a Node.js for .NET. It might have been called NetNode. I forget. That does enable some sort of communication. Can we call web services from this code? Of course. Not only is Node good at supporting writing your own servers, it's also very good at making client requests to other servers. And so the HTTP module that I called create server is also a create client method. Most people use an npm module called request to make their HTTP requests. If you had used the web API from Microsoft, their client framework, their client API, request is kind of like that. So let's look for node requests, and yep, this is the module that I think most people use when it comes to making client-side a request from a client to some remote HTTP server. It's got a fluent API, and it makes it really easy to use. Much easier to use than Node's low-level HTTP client. If you look at npm and go to the home folder, home page, request is the number 3 most dependent on library in this public Node ecosystem here. This is other libraries that depend on requests. This doesn't count applications that you write in private. They don't know what you use in private. But we're talking about raw HTTP requests here, not web service requests like you may be implying. If you need to do SOAP and WSDL type stuff, I've never done that from Node.js. So the only kind of APIs I've consumed from Node are RESTful APIs, where you don't need all the XML junk. Okay, a long one. How do I see it all? Any advice on how to do local desktop thin client that contains both server as well as client code? Yes. Okay, so the one that seems to be the most popular is called Node-WebKit. And I haven't made an official product with this, but I did do a proof of concept for a client last year. And I used Node-WebKit to basically host a server running inside a process that also hosted Chromium, Chrome's rendering engine. And so I would look at this as far as creating what you can consider a one client and server bundle that you can give to your users, and they open an app, and they really can't tell that that app is really a combination of a web browser and a web server hiding inside that one process. So Node-WebKit is the name of this project. I've seen others too that try to do the same thing, but this one seems to be the most active and have the most people using it. The number of issues is kind of scary, but I was able to do it and get my proof of concept to work, and I was really pleased with it. So it has support for printing too, which is a big deal for us because we were printing, generating reports with charts and a bunch of data, and we need to be able to print that data. And so they just hit Control P. And the browser that was embedded inside Node.WebKit was able to print. I would look at that, and oh my goodness, there's so many. What is your opinion about Breeze.js? I know nothing about it, other than the high-level overview of it and how it is a client-side framework for communicating, like doing the RIA data services type stuff with your servers. And at the time I looked at it, the only server-side support they have is for Entity Framework. And at the time, I might have had just been starting my current project or doing a Node.js project, and I wasn't doing .NET, so it didn't really help me that much. So I have no opinion on it. But a lot of smart people are using it, so I assume I'm going to defer to their opinion and assume it's cool. Can you debug console apps step-by-step in VS 2012? Absolutely. So I did set a couple breakpoints in Visual Studio, and I was hitting F10 and F11 and F5, so it works the exact same way as it does in normal apps. Would you make a web service with Node.js? If you mean the web service that supports SOAP and WSDL and all those WS star extensions, you totally could. I don't know how. Haven't done that in Node.js. I've done that a ton of times in .NET. Right? .NET makes it really easy to create those WS star extensions based web services is what I'm trying to say. But in Node.js world, there's not a WSDL.exe tool or add service references tool inside your IDE to generate a proxy for you. It probably exists. It just hasn't been my experience. In the Node community, they tend to prefer, and by tend I mean exclusively, only ever talk about RESTful web services. It seems to me like the only place where the SOAP web services are still alive and kicking is in the .NET and Java worlds, and everywhere else they switch to REST. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it matches my preference, so I prefer REST 2 over the SOAP stuff. All right, so Kasim, I hope I didn't miss any questions. If there were two Node servers, say in the same project, if I wanted to communicate between the two, would it have to be via export or some other way? Okay, so two Node servers. Now you have the choice when you are creating servers and listening on certain ports. You have a choice as to whether to do that multiple servers in one process or separate processes. If they're in the same process, they share the same global data. So you can stick stuff in the global state of the V8 runtime inside Node.js, and the two servers running in the same process can totally share that. If they're running in different processes, that can't happen, and now they have to find some means to communicate. And that could be as something as low tech as writing, one process writes to a file and the other process notices the file and then he reads it. They could be communicating across Unix sockets or normal TCP sockets. So it's totally just the normal rules of process isolation and how you choose to deploy your applications. If you meant that they're two servers and you say in the same project, but they're in different processes, then things get harder. And the way that I'm handling that in my current app is with using Redis, REDIS, the remote dictionary server. It runs on Windows too. So it's like a distributed dictionary. That's really what Redis means, I think, remote dictionary server. And you can basically stick data in there under a known key. Other processes then get notified that that key changed, and then they can read the data that's inside it. And so we use that to communicate between our web servers and our jobs, our workers that are running in other processes. Because we can have lots of servers in our farm, we can have lots of workers that are processing these jobs, and they communicate out of process via Redis. But that's just the technology that we chose to use because there are libraries that made it easy for us. You got tons of options, and there's no definitive solution. But just like in .NET, you have lots of options. You could use a named pipe. You can use system level memory map files, or there's just tons of options. For the most part, we probably normally just open up a web service in the services, and we start talking to each other that way using ASMX file or WCF. In Node, it's pretty easy to spin up new servers too inside your process as well, and it can be as low level as a raw socket. It's Edge module. So I don't know what you meant by that last comment. It's Edge module, but I hope I answered your first question. So from Gopi, in a typical web app, how many instances of Node is run, like clustering? So because Node.js and JavaScript is single-threaded, you typically will have multiple processes to handle the load. That doesn't mean that you need to have one process per user, per request. That would be out of control. As far as the resources you need on the server. One node process with one thread could probably handle hundreds of concurrent requests. As long as they're all I/O bound and there's not anything computationally expensive happening during the requests. Otherwise, things will get started to queued up. But there's a module called cluster that is built into Node.js as part of the core API, and it handles spinning up different processes, one per core or per CPU that you have on your machine. That's typically how you configure it. So if you use the cluster API to say, hey Node, I want to run this script in a cluster, and he does the management part of it for you. You add a tiny bit of code. It might make a little bit more sense if we went to, you can see it very briefly, but nodejs.org API cluster .html. Oh, I spelled it wrong. Okay, so here in the cluster documentation, and you can get here by going to the home website, then hit docs, and then find the cluster in the list. But they show that you just take your script, and here's your script right here. This is your whole app. It's a very tiny app. And you wrap it in this little bit of boilerplate code. So there's not a whole lot of code that you have to do to support this. But basically, you say, hey, cluster API, if I'm the master, the first instance of this file to get launched, then I'm going to spawn a bunch of other processes, and those are normally based on the amount of CPUs that you have, cores that you have on your server. And so once you run this code, this same file gets run over and over again for num CPU's time, and isMaster ends up being false in those other cases. And so you have this set of processes running on the same machine that can handle now not just a few hundred requests, but a few thousand. So there's lots of details as to how to tune your server for as getting as much resource utilization as possible out of it. And I read a weblog posting a while ago, maybe like a year ago, about a guy who got 1 million concurrent requests onto one server using Node.js. They're WebSocket requests. Or connections, I should say, instead of requests. So you got one machine to handle 1 million. I almost don't believe it. So it doesn't seem physically possible. But I didn't see anybody. I never went through the details of the article and tried to replicate it on my own. But he did give enough details for you to do that if you wanted to experiment it on your own and try that out. But nobody called him out on it and said he was lying. So I kind of assuming that he did get it to work, even though it sounds completely unbelievable to me. But you can do a lot, and it's based on Node's focus on being able to have these very lightweight asynchronous I/O operations. They designed Node from the ground up to be able to handle a super high load. Okay, Nandu, can you give some use cases when Node.js can be used in enterprise infrastructure applications? Any use case you can use MVC in, you can use Node. You can use any place you can use Web API, you can use Node. Those are web-specific frameworks. Any place where you need to shuttle bits, you can do some ETL operations, extract, transform loads from one server to another. Node's very good at that. Node has a very strong foundation on what they call streams, to where you can pipe a bunch of data through these streams and do decompression and compression and transformation of the data as it goes through the streams without consuming a lot of memory. That's really Node's core focus. The whole web stuff on top of that is just stuff added on top of it by people who use the foundation and created libraries and frameworks specific to their needs for creating web apps. Node is used a lot for real-time interactivity between clients and servers, lots of clients and servers, like some sort of, all we can see is your cursor on a black screen for the last couple of minutes, but you can still hear me? I'm not really showing much. That's strange, I'm sorry. It says still showing my screen. I'm not showing much, I'm just going through and answering the questions. So if the screen is black, then that's a bummer, but I'm not showing anything yet. Or I'm not showing anything. So yeah, as far as use cases go, think of it as a programming language. Every place you can use Java, you can use .NET, right? Same thing with Node, it's just another platform. So there's not specific use cases that people use Node for, although it does kind of get pigeonholed into a web application development framework. And a lot of people do use it for doing WebSocket type stuff, using a client application like chat and peer-to-peer type sharing of data. So it's just an alternative. So if it suits your style, then you can use it. And it's gotten enough widespread recognition among the community and support by major players like Microsoft that it's a viable alternative to Java and .NET. Okay. Edge node module. That must be what I was referring to. Is it written by a guy named Thomas? I forget his last name. It's a hard last name for me to pronounce. But Edge might be what I was thinking of for doing the Node and .NET Interop. And so you already know about it. Yeah, that's the thing that I'd heard of too, but never have used before, Kasim. So if you've got experience with it and it works, then cool. But so far I've been doing some pretty straightforward Node-only development with a little bit of importing data from legacy systems. And there's plenty of modules that enable me to do that, to read and write this data from SQL Server and I assume also Oracle. I haven't had to do that yet. Okay. So sorry about the black screen. If you guys are still seeing that, it could be just you. Yes, it's probably you, Mary. It seems like we got, I made it through the questions. So if there are any more, try to remember my name. Let me close the slides. If you can't see this, my name again is Jason Diamond. My email address is jdiamond@develop.com. jdiamond is also my GitHub username, so you can find the repo where I'm going to upload this code in just a few minutes. So thank you very much for coming, guys. I appreciate all the questions. That was more than I normally get, but I did save them for the end this time. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you in class sometime.